Josiah Gluck, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, thank you. Good morning from chilly New York City.
What part of New York are you in?
I'm on the Upper West Side, total New York City native, born and bred. So,
Really?
yeah. Spent the first 2 years of my life on this very same block, very same side of the street. Just worked out that way.
How many places have you moved to? A bunch of places in that area? Or are you basically one place and then to where you
No,
are
I mean,
now?
well, I was a kid, and then when my younger brother was born, we moved all of 6 blocks away to a building which I can almost see from here, and then ran away to college for 4 years, but came back often, and then lived on the east side for almost 20 years, and then I met my wife, and she brought me back home to my roots.
Hey, well, Josiah, I got a question before we really get into anything. I had Jackie, the joke man, on Martling on my podcast a couple days ago, and at the end of each show, I say, you know, if the next guest is coming up soon, I say the next guest is. I said Josiah Gluck is coming on, and Jackie says, "Ask Josiah where his $7,500 is." He wouldn't say anything else, but he said, "I have to ask you that." Do you know what he's talking about?
No, I mean, I know Jackie. I haven't spoken to him lately, but I guess now I have to. The $7,500. I don't know. I mean, my kneecaps are intact, so I don't know what he's talking about.
Honestly,
I'll have to reach out to him and see what that's about.
I honestly have no clue.
No, I'm trying to remember. Oh, boy. I thought you were going to say, Jackie said, why hasn't he called? Doesn't he love me?
No, he just said ask Joe where his $7,500 is, or he wants his $7,500. I asked him for more context, and he wouldn't say anything else. But that seems like a very Jackie Martling thing to do.
Oh, that he needs $7,500 from me.
Yeah, it's.
Oh, well,
where
then
is
I don't.
it, like,
No, I don't know who you're talking about. Then I don't know this.
I'm gonna tell him you said that.
Okay.
Wait, so you've been from New York your whole life. Were your parents, because now you're in showbiz, were your parents in any type of entertainment or show business at all when you were younger?
No, they're both college professors. Dad, overeducated with a few degrees, including a PhD from philosophy up the road here at Columbia University. And my mom had a doctorate from Columbia and a master's in fine arts, and they actually met cute as grad students at Columbia. So that's why we were just sort of in this neighborhood growing up.
Did you ever want to become a professor like your parents?
No.
Not at all? Not even considered
No,
it?
I mean, I know I took a lot of time to think about that answer, but no, I didn't want to.
So no one was in show business. They were all professors, and you were big into art history. I know you ended up going to college for art history, right?
Well, yeah, I was always interested in that, and my mom was an art historian and taught art education, but I always loved technology, music, gadgets, tape recorders, TVs, record players, movie projectors, all that sort of stuff just fascinated me as a kid.
Oh, really? So wait, when was it that you specifically started getting into audio engineering?
Well, I mean, I fooled around with some stuff in high school, and my younger brother Sebastian had a little tiny reel-to-reel tape recorder that I used to try to fool around with and do things with, and trying to fix things where if we made a fake like radio play and actually sort of figured out how I could do punch-ins and whatnot. It was all just purely instinctual, and they're like, oh, maybe this would work, kind of thing. But it wasn't until I really got to college and was able to spend an inordinate amount of time at the radio station.
Yeah, you DJ'd classical music at
Yeah,
what was it, John Hopkins?
Johns Hopkins, yes. Well known for its radio station. I did work with the classical music department at the radio station and also production engineering, but it was just an absolute perfect outlet and a place to learn and meet fellow, how shall I say, geeks to really want to learn how to do this and how to edit tape and so forth. And I also took. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, when you went to college, I know you had a different degree, but did you intend on doing anything audio related before you got there?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I always felt some sort of showbiz or technical support of showbiz kind of activity. I mean, I did tried to do a little bit of directing with plays in high school, and I did lighting design insofar as, all right, someone's over there, turn this light up. I mean, I wasn't looking at Licos and Fresnels and get this kind of cookie and know all these gel numbers and so forth, but it was fun to do. I mean, it was mixing with lights if you want to get, whatever about it. But but just the technical support. I mean, I was always fascinated with cinematography.
Yeah,
And
you're a big film buff, right?
yeah, yeah.
Was that always like ever since you were a little kid? You were always into
Oh,
that?
sure. Oh, sure. I mean, my twin brother who lives in Los Angeles, Theo, and is just wrapping up his tenure as director of library restoration and preservation for Disney. I vividly remember when he and I were, 5 years old, 6 years old, going to the World's Fair in New York in 1964 and seeing this thing with massive screens and all sorts of multiple screens. And we were trying to stand on the backs of the chairs to peer into the projection booth to figure out, so how do they do that? And now, I've done the research. I know it was a thing called To Be Alive, and Francis Thompson directed it. He did the first IMAX movie, and all of these sort of things. But even from that age, I just always loved it. Just loved music and loved technology. And where I wound up is sort of a perfect blend of the two.
Did you play any instruments when you were young?
I took piano lessons, but I kind of stopped those around the beginning of high school. And I used to have okay-ish chops, but they've really just sort of fallen off over the years. I just
It's not your main passion.
No. I mean, I wish I could play. I mean, I guess piano, and if I could play acoustic guitar. But I know these things take many tens of thousands of hours, and since I'm not going to sound like James Taylor or Pat Metheny as soon as I pick it up, I'm very much one of those people like, oh, the hell with it.
Yeah, I've always wanted to play acoustic guitar, and I know very basic stuff, but when it comes to like anything that is at all impressive, I can't do it, and so I end up I practice for like a couple hours, and I go, and I never touch it for another month.
And the reason I think piano was easier for me is because it's all very graphic. This is lower than this, which is lower than that, which is lower than that, which is lower than that, so forth. And it's literally all laid out, and it's one key per function. Whereas guitar is like three-dimensional chess. And where am I moving here? Yes, you play the D here, but don't I play it there? Yes, but not all the time. And I get that, and it's like math mixed with parkour, where you just jump to everything. It's the best way I can describe it. And that's just eluded me.
Yeah, I've always felt the same way because like the piano, and I'm not very good at piano either. My mother taught me piano when I was young, so I have the technical skill, but I'm not the smoothest at it. But I always found that it was easier. You're right, because it's like left to right, low to high. It's much more simple. But guitar, you're right. It is like 3D chess, which stinks because I would really love to be good at it because I always wanted to be the kind of person who can just kind of sit down with a guitar and play. That is kind of a douchey thing to do if you're like the kind of guy who just sits down and plays guitar. But I like the idea of being that person.
Well, it's not so much douchey. I mean, the thing is, it's like the people who can play piano and talk to you at the same time.
Incredible.
Or play guitar and talk and not even look at the fretboard. It's to me like when we get these dancers on SNL working behind these various artists or what have you. Or when they get professional dancers in to do something in a sketch. The fact that they don't look at their feet, to me, is the most amazing thing. And
I used to do tap dancing, and I always like my teacher was like that, where he could just do this amazing stuff, and he wouldn't have to look at his feet, and I was always blown away because I'd have to stare down there like I was reading a book. Sorry, keep going.
No, exactly. Yeah, it's like you were having to read the book at your feet.
Wait, so now when you were young and you were from New York City and you go to college in Baltimore, that's where Johns Hopkins is?
Yeah, Johns Hopkins is in Baltimore, yeah.
Okay, well my experience when I came to college was I'm from Central New York, and then I used to love New York City as a little kid. That was like my favorite place to go. And so I specifically wanted to go to New York City. Being from there as a child, what was it did you have a specific thing like I want to get out of here, or did you have any options in the city that you wanted to go to for colleges?
I knew I wanted to be out of New York, and being on the East Coast, I guess was, so I was far away, but not too far away. I did look at other schools, and I got into Northwestern out in Evanston, Illinois. But I remember on the tour, it was something like almost 40 below wind chill coming off the lake or something. And it's like, I can't. I'm not going to be able to do this for 4 years. And I mean, it's very easy to look back and say, oh, I really should have gone to UCLA and I would have been right in the heart of things and so forth. And who knows? I mean, but I mean, now sometimes I think I'd like to go to one of the three Bs, move to, Burlington or Boulder or Barcelona or Paris, but.
Wait, so how long were you in Baltimore after college before you came back to the city?
It was pretty much instantaneous. I mean, I graduated and I came back, and there was a studio that I had worked at before. They had tracked me down in the waning days of my senior year and said, we need someone right away. And I'm like, guys, let me get my sheepskin and I'll be right there. I was thinking, this is fantastic. I'm going to go into a studio, because I had done a summer job at a whopping $5 a day as an intern. Summer of 1980. And then I came back to the city, basically dropped my bags, and they're like, yeah, we don't need you, but there's a place down the block. You might want to try them. So I went to Secret Sound, and I was basically hired on the spot and worked there for about 16 months or so, and then was snatched up by a record label, and everything just sort of moved on from there.
And that was that GRP?
GRP Records, yes.
Okay,
They
and that's
came in to do a project.
and that's like the early '80s, early to mid '80s.
Yes, this was, I guess, August of 1982. I met Dave Grusin and the late Larry Rosen, and we just hit it off and moved up to work with them.
What was your first big assignment for GRP?
Well, we had some big stuff right off the bat. Dave scored the first episode and wrote the theme for the TV show Saint Elsewhere. So that was really a trial by fire, because there was a lot of working with synchronizers and making the machine chase an old thing called, wasn't even an Adam Smith. It'll occur to me as to what the thing was, but it was really very primitive stuff. I mean, now I work in Pro Tools. Someone sends you a video file, you just spot it where it is, and it's all there.
Yeah.
And with nonlinear, you're at the first frame of picture and sound, or the last frame of picture and sound, the push of a button. There you had to just wind up through everything. But we worked on that. There was someone who came into BTX Shadow. That's what it was called. It was a BTX Shadow. Just fired. And we did that. It was a very long day of recording all these cues. Everything was in mono, and eventually I did remix the theme in stereo when NBC went stereo. All television like that. 1984, 85 started going in stereo. But I did a bunch of other records for them, working with Dave on his album Nightlines, and then working with a bunch of other artists. And then slowly I was given the job of doing an entire album from start to finish. And some of that was pulling the alignment tape off the shelf and lining up the multi-track machine to do the work in our studio, and then take it to other studios and do overdubs. So they say if you did sort of this geeky crossfade in a movie from things crossfade to putting the needle down on the reference disc or the test pressing and see how that sounded. So there was tremendously good fortune and opportunity to go from literally setting up the machines to evaluating the test pressing for the final product, as opposed to being one of 24 guys listed on a record because it jumped from studio to studio to studio, and you happen to be the guy to overdub the moose call or the ocarina or the zither or whatever they were adding.
Mm-hmm.
So what was very nice is if it said recorded and mixed by me, that was it. I was the guy who had my hands on the whole sonic landscape to sound really pretentious about it.
And so this must have been right before computers started. Because when was the first major computer? Was the Apple One or whatever? It was like '84, right? Is that something like that?
Yes, I mean, I actually remember when they got one of the office manager slash bookkeeper got some sort of Apple II or something with this sort of icky yellow orange screen. But it was right around that time we had an early Linn drum machine, the Linn 2, and some synthesizers. Oddly enough, Dave, we didn't have an acoustic piano up at the studio, and that was really my axe. And so after a while, I had moved out of my folks' house, so I just stopped playing piano. And back in the day, you didn't really have like weighted keyboards, like the Oberheim keys would just like snap back at you. So
Yeah,
it
for like
just,
a toy.
it just never, yeah, it felt like a toy. It just never felt right. So I just stopped all of my keyboard endeavors. But yeah, we had, and as far as computers and sequencers and synthesizers, it was just so much stuff that people would bring in, and I would have racks and racks of stuff, and MIDI was just coming in, and when I was at Secret Sound doing a project, and the great Rob Mounsey came in with this sequencer where you basically played a note, and there were these little switches, and it took him seemingly forever to be able to play, then be able to press a note and have this arpeggio run for a couple of measures. And I know it sounds like, yeah, and then we used to take the torch off this side of the cave wall and bring it to this side of the cave wall so you could do the alignment. But
Yeah.
it was really quite a lot more hands-on. I mean, analog in the very true sense of the word, that it was just, you did this and that happened.
At that point, was there like a specific audio engineering skill that you had that was kind of your, like your specific cup of tea?
Well, I think what I learned back then, and it still works for me today, is working with live musicians, with working with a band. Because back then, we're doing basic tracks. Well, you would come in and you'd have to set up for drums, for bass, guitar, one or two keyboards, maybe a couple horn players, maybe a vocalist laying down a scratch track. Ironically enough, at Secret Sound, one of our big clients who would come in most Friday evenings was the Saturday Night Live house band. So a couple of the guys I work with now, I've known for almost 40 years.
Really?
Yeah, like Leon Pendarvis, and some of the cats in the band I'm still in touch with. Hal Wilner, who just passed away almost a year ago or so, was the sort of schlepper from the music department. He would come in with the charts and put pencils on everybody's music stand. And he was the guy I worked with many years later at the show. We worked together exclusively, basically, 3 years before I moved into the music room.
Mm-hmm.
So what that gave me, and as far as the skill that I learned there, was being able to handle a lot of different inputs at once. As opposed to now, a lot of things are rarely with live breathing musicians. Everything is very much the over-engineered single channel of get this killer preamp, get this killer mic, and we'll use this for the ubiquitous ocarina, zither, or moose call.
Yeah.
As we build things up, but to be able to get sort of get that aggregate of people playing together, people looking at each other, people hearing each other, all these little things that sort of come together to do this, and that to me is what creates the sound of a record or the sound of a performance. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult, in my opinion, to build these things up piecemeal. Some are done fantastically, but it's also a little sterile.
Yeah, there's definitely times I hit the wrong key there. There are definitely times that I've noticed music that is very put together part by part, and you can hear when someone who understands music is doing it versus when someone who just, that's just the way that it's done nowadays does it. You can hear that there's a specialty and a refinement that certain people have where they can piece together something and make it sound cohesive which I think is really interesting to do because it's a difficult skill, but it's like almost getting the best of both worlds. But again, it's like it's so hard to do it that most people just aren't able to piece it together
Well,
correctly.
what always used to impress me is when people would come in with, like an ARP string ensemble or this Oberheim, OBXA or something, and they would, or a Jupiter 8, and they'd be doing these string parts. And regardless of how good or bad it sounded, but if they played a part that made sense that that's what strings would do, rather than someone just thinking, well, okay, I'll do this tonic on the whole note, and then I'll do this, and maybe I'll get clever and do this little chromatic thing. But if you actually played it as though it had, if someone who was an arranger did it, it would really sell it. It would really help the illusion, if you will.
Yeah.
And that to me is if someone who's coming from a background of working with real players. I mean, I know this sounds very curmudgeonly, but that's the milieu that I grew up in studios.
Yeah. And so wait, and talking about being able to do many tracks at once instead of just piecemeal, how many tracks are we talking in terms of how many inputs are you doing while you're at GRP usually?
Oh, I mean, it completely varies. If you're doing a little piano trio, it may be a dozen, depending on how much overkill you want to do on the mic, on the drum kit. But then there are times at SNL where it's upwards of 80 or 90 inputs. I mean, the house
Really?
band, and the house band alone is about, you have dedicated like 49 or 50 inputs for them, and then it scales up anywhere from, I've had bands where, well, let's just put a mic on the ride cymbal just so we get out to 16 inputs, because it's maybe a three-piece band. But I think the first thing I ever mixed in surround was Sheryl Crow, and she had like a 9-piece band and a 12-piece string section. Probably the biggest thing we ever did was the NBC 75th anniversary show, which Lauren produced, and they expanded the whole guest band area, like a 55-piece orchestra in there. And
Really?
yeah, and that was somewhere Toscanini would smile in.
And wait, when you do that, are you miking up like sections and then bussing those down and then compressing and EQing there? Do you have settings on each input?
What we did was we worked with this fantastic engineer named John Kurlander, who is the orchestra was conducted by Howard Shore, who was one of the original music directors for SNL.
He wrote the theme song, right?
Yes, and John is Howard's scoring mixer for a couple decades. So John had spec'd out how he wanted things done, and we actually had little mics on all the violins, but what we did was most of them wore these little tiny mics on their ears, so it would be right by the violin. And so everything, we just wanted to have as much control and as much isolation. Also, 8H is, for all intents and purposes, a small room, and it's a tight area, and you're dealing with PA and other dialogue and other things, so was it overkill? Possibly. But myself, Jay Vicari, and John Kurlander mixed this thing, and it was a lot of work.
And was that 75th anniversary broadcast live?
Yes.
Okay, so it was all of your work done like ahead of time or done live, or did you have time to go back afterward for reruns?
I don't know. I don't think it was ever rebroadcast simply because of the cost of music clearances and other clips and whatnot. And I don't know. I'm the wrong guy to ask, but it probably didn't make sense for them to do it simply from a rating standpoint, whether or not, everyone really wants to see this again. I don't know.
Is 8H floated?
It is in a way. It was, when it was originally designed, yes, it was floated, because in 1932, if you think about SNL and you look at the bandstand and where the host comes out to the stairs, well, behind that is our amp room, and then maybe another 20 feet behind that is a hallway, and there's an elevator bank, and from there's the outside. So I'm guessing from where they're standing, maybe 100 feet behind them, give or take, is 6th Avenue. And a floor or two below that, we're on the 8th floor, I suppose I could look up just how high the 6th Avenue elevated subway was, which ran right by there. So even in 1932, they decided that this has got to be isolated from the noise of the elevated subway, which is effectively behind the stage. And even though we're talking about the limited frequency response of AM radio at the time, and even though they did some recordings there, though I think Toscanini and Company did most of their recording at Carnegie Hall, the NBC Symphony Orchestra, it was floated for a reason, for that isolation. And if something big and heavy is rolling off and you're standing on the floor, you might feel it bounce a little bit. Most of that has been compromised over the decades as soon as walls and other stuff in the ceiling were changed to accommodate hanging lights and scenery and so forth. But it was the headquarters of the Radio Corporation of America, RCA, who owned NBC, and you are in Radio City because it was radio studios, 8H being the biggest one. And even though it seems kind of small when you're in there, as I tell people, you find me another column-free space in Midtown Manhattan where you can put all of this gear in. I mean, the fact that it exists in the middle of Manhattan is just insane to me.
I mean, it blows my mind that anyone can do any form of large production in New York City. Just because even if you put all this sound insulation, just New York is probably, in terms of audio, the worst place to be. And then in a skyscraper, just like you said, having a massive, not massive for New York City, open space. And I got one opportunity to go into the studio. I haven't seen the show, but I got to go on when they do the NBC tours.
Mm-hmm.
And back when I went in, I didn't really know much about. I had watched SNL my whole life, but I wasn't yet like very up to date on how the show was run and everything. And so going there, all I could think about is this must be an absolute mess to make sound good. Is it a really hard room to mix music for? Because everything's got the concrete floors. It must be miserable in some way.
Well, the big difference between that and being in a recording studio is that a recording studio is a purpose-built room for recording music with proper amounts of isolation in certain areas which are probably deader or liver than others, less reverb, what have you. Something where there's maybe a brick wall or some sort of stone face because this is where we want to put drums, so you get a little spark or snap from that. But what we have to do is make sure that the audience seated in the room are hearing it properly, because if they're not laughing, then clearly it's not loud enough. And there may be another diagnosis, but we don't go there. But the thing is, if the dialogue is terribly loud, then it starts to leak into the audience mics. And the audience mics it's very much a house of cards, and our A1 fellow named Bob Palladino, who mixes this stuff perfectly, is you have to make sure that it doesn't get too tanky and start to sound, you don't hear the sound of the room.
Yeah.
You want a certain liveness, but you also want a certain kind of clarity. Everything is time aligned so that the audience is hearing everything properly. So for us with music specifically, it's just that everything can be very loud on a small stage. And a big problem we've had in the time of COVID has been where Lenny Pickett sits now, where he's always seated out front. They've taken some of the band members and moved them down to the floor of the Jimmy Fallon studio. And
was it the percussionists mainly? They always do a wide shot during commercial.
Yes, so Valerie's down there as our trumpet, alto sax, and Barry and Bone are all down there. Yeah, Lenny's the only person upstairs. And so Lenny is playing, and at his left is where Tuffus, our keyboardist, sits. But now there's like a little plexiglass barrier around Tuffus. and it comes out a foot or two beyond Lenny. Lenny, because he's playing his mic and there are people there, he has kind of windscreen over the bell of the sax. So the little clip-on DPA mic is out of the bell just a little bit more than it normally would be. Sean is over there playing drums, and even though everybody's on in-ears, that's really the only major noisemaker on the set. Well, his drums are now ricocheting off this plexiglass and into Lenny's mic, and we're getting leakage issues that we never used to have.
So did you have to like
everyone downstairs sounds gloriously clean because they're in these little plexiglass, like the thing they try to break out of in Spinal Tap, with the pump.
Yeah.
But everyone's down in their little world, and all of that's nice and clean. But all of a sudden, we're getting a lot of drum leakage, and there's a certain ambience and tightness that we're getting, and a tightness that's gone away. And mind you, leakage is your friend. Leakage can be fantastic for getting a sense of space and spatial cues in the room, but for us, it's not working that well.
The Fallon Studio actually has surprisingly good audio. I've heard that it was built kind of they put some money into really making sure it was more isolated. So you should be able to you're able to get a nice clean feed from them. But having Sean in the room, are there times, like say during sketches, if they need drums, that you have to say, man, maybe we should do it like this instead of just having him play his kit?
We do have an electric drum kit. That is, you'll see him move to the side and play this little sort of pads and whatnot. It's evolved over the years to have lots of different samples, and I'll be listening to it, and I'll say sometimes, can we get a little less of this or a little less of that, because it just comes to us. It's a stereo mix.
Okay.
And do little, I'll ask them to make little adjustments. Of course, the band and the MDs would very much like to use the real drums, but there are times we really can't. If you're doing a monologue or a singing thing and someone's on a lav or they're on a handheld, then you can get away. But if it's the sort of thing where they're not doing that and then they're on a boom and they want to start talking, it's really a lot of diplomacy that's going on.
Okay.
And all of us after a while have, which is a phrase I stole from my twin, we have tribal knowledge at this point. We've all been there a long time, and a lot of these scenarios, we kind of know how to navigate and negotiate and figure out what we need to do.
Okay. And before I get to nerding into SNL questions, let me go back one more second, because I want to make sure, I want to more on your background, because I know if we get on the SNL topic, I'm going to have a quadrillion just dorky questions about it. But so you graduate college in 81 and you end up at SNL in 88. Were you at GRP for those whole 7 years?
I didn't get to SNL until 93. At GRP, I then, in the spring of 1988, I was contacted by a gentleman who sadly passed away about a year ago, Stacey Foster. He was at Broadway Video, and my best friend was his sound mixer when Stacey was an editor in the early days of Broadway Video, and now he was technical consultant for SNL. Excuse me. And there was a show starting up called Sunday Night, later known as Night Music, with David Sanborn. And they needed a music mixer for it. And unbeknownst to me, I found out later a bunch of colleagues who Stacey had contacted. So who do I need? Who should I get for this? And I was like, you wanted to get that guy Josiah from GRP Records to mix your music. Because the band was Omar Hakim and Hiram Bullock, who I'd worked on with the record when I first got to Secret Sound. So, it was Hiram, Marcus Miller, Omar Hakim, Philippe Sayce, Bashiri Johnson.
What a damn lineup.
Oh, it was ridiculous. And then all of these phenomenal singers when we needed them. And I got to work with a lot of different artists, and I was sort of thrown into this thing, not having had any live music mix experience, no broadcast experience. It was an absolute sink or swim kind of thing. And I remember the first couple of shows just, and it was all to tape. I remember just looking at my hands; they were just like shaking with just adrenaline narcosis, if such a thing is even possible. And I remember someone singing on a mic and then putting it down and picking up another mic, and Stacy reaching over and pulling down the mic that was not being used anymore at that point, as in, don't forget that. I mean, the fact that I wasn't fired on the spot was amazing. But I worked on that show for the better part of the season, and I kept in touch with all of those people. First time I met Bob Clearmountain, he came by because he was doing some stuff at SNL, and it's like, oh my God, Bob. And then Stacy reached out to me in late summer of 1992 and said, I need someone to work on this one specific audio aspect of SNL. Would you like to come on board? It's like, well, it's not really the sort of thing I do. It's more like radio. He goes like, well, I'd like to have you there, and I'd rather you not have any preconceived notions about how this show works, because it's so specific. And it's so developed over time. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happens there that are kind of unique to the way the show works.
Did you have any preconceived notions, like, anyway, that you were thinking about going in?
No, I guess I just didn't have, I had no concept of just the sheer stark terror of being live on the air. And I tell people now, if I kind of can be at the show somewhat like chewing gum and walking, or playing piano and talking, or, you know, keeping an eye on words with friends or whatever. But that's it's just purely due to time served. Mm-hmm. It's just because I've been there. I mean, this is now my 29th year at the show.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. And all these people say, oh, 29 years, you ought to write a book. I'm like, well, the reason I've been there for 29 years is because I haven't written the book. Not that there's anything to really write about from my end of things, but...
Do you think the NBC executives would not be so favorable of you talking about their shows?
You know, there are plenty of times when people say, oh, could you do this? Could you get me that? Can I do this? Can I do that? You know, a lot of civilians ask. I was like, you know what? Part of the thing is I have to demonstrate a certain intelligence that I know what's cool and what's not cool. And the bigger thing is, and it's spoken, but it's largely unspoken most of the time, is that for the host and the guest music, they are working, as we all are, they call it the Chuck Yeager learning curve, to get to 11:30 on a Saturday and then just hope for a smooth landing at 1 a.m. Mm-hmm. And in that time, in that ramp up to that time, and then while you're on the air, you're kind of in a protective cocoon, a protective bubble. It's like, if you are that guitarist and at your 10,000th and 1 hour, everything starts sounding magnificent, you don't want anyone to listen to what you were doing in hour 1 or hour 73. So that we have to afford them the cocoon, that protective, you know, while the show is pupating, they have to have that ability to do that. So that's why you don't say, oh, could you get this person to say something to me on my phone? I'm like, no.
Yeah, because they're just trying to go in and do their job. They don't want to be hounded by a bunch of people who want, you know, a free, basically a cameo.
A fellow I used to work with there is retired, one of the audio assistants, was telling me that he was once saying to someone who's like, oh, when the guy first started working there, oh, this is great because I'll get to meet all these people and we'll hang and this and that. And this guy said, you know what? These are big time celebrities. They got plenty of friends. They don't need any more friends. Do you know what they need? They need a microphone. Put it on them and get them out on the stage.
Mm-hmm. I know some people, because when I was in high school, I was definitely more of the starstruck kind of person. Mm-hmm. And then I met so many people who were just like fiending to like be in the company of successful or famous people that it almost turned it away. I mean, when I was in high school, the idea of, you know, like, if I saw someone like, I don't know, Howard Stern, I would have been flipping out. And now it's to the point where I see it, especially in New York, because New York is a kind of city where a lot of people who are here are just trying to get in the company of celebrities. It's almost annoying. You're like, can you guys just do your own thing, focus on it, and then see where you get? Don't try to just like jam your personality into everyone's life. Going on a little rant.
My kids get on my case about that. We were talking about something the other day with, I said like, oh, not, like the Wayne's World thing of not.
Yep.
And I said, I remember, because when that first hit, I said, yeah, I remember there was this thing in the Times crossword puzzle, like Wayne's World negative or something, and it was like not. And I was working at the show that day, and I was out at the craft services area, also affectionately called the Trough, and there was Mike Myers. I said, oh, dude, check this out. And my daughter's like, you can't just do that. You can't just say, oh, yeah, that's what I was talking about. Yeah, but, it's not meant to be douchey. It's just,
yeah.
It just is.
Well, it seems like you guys kind of have more of it seems like there's kind of a family vibe at SNL. Tell me if I'm totally wrong. It's just from talking to people, like talking to you. I had Don Roy King on my show and then Lenny Pickett last week. It just seems like everyone seems pretty close-knit. So something like that doesn't seem totally out of the ordinary, especially, if you're once you've had such a tenure there, 29 years now, that it seems like you can be a little bit more relaxed.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I say, we put the fun in dysfunctional as a family. It is, although there are some people, I say it's like being in college, where you can be on the campus going back and forth. We'll see that person, like, hey, how you doing? You see them all the time. You don't know their name, you don't know their major, you don't know where they live or where they're from. You just know they belong there. There are plenty of crew people. You'll say, hey, how you doing, and so forth. I don't know their names. I don't know what they do. I mean, it's a massive crew between the stagehands and the painters, the overnight crew. There's overnight set people I probably never see. I've gotten to know some cast members over the years. You'll have a little schmooze or something like that. But it's not the be-all and end-all of it, and so forth. And I know that it is a very cool privilege to work there. It's amazing to walk in and out of NBC. The building is such history, so amazing. And in this day and age right now, with all of the, just the health, what am I trying to say here, all the pandemic accommodations, it's become a little less familial in that I work in a separate studio now. Jay and I work remotely from each other on identical consoles. I'm burrowed into other things, so to work upstairs. I'm not having as many opportunities to work with guest bands, although I did get to do the Foo Fighters a few weeks ago, do that show, and there'll probably be a few others. Typically, Jay is out on the road doing a lot of other gigs, and so he and I kind of split the season. Mm-hmm. This year, not a lot of live music for him to be doing stuff. So, but I'm always doing other support, and plus I do all the post-production with another fellow for when we remix the shows for syndication.
Okay. So you do get time to go back, and there's a split between you just doing things live and then going back and being able to fix things.
Yes, I mean, and we could remix the music, and there was a time when we did that more often, but I think just with increased skill, confidence, reliability of gear, and I think trying to be true to the moment, when it happened.
Is anything Are any of those tracks going through analog equipment in terms of compressors and EQ, or is everything raw to the interface, the mixer?
Before we went to digital consoles, about 15 years ago, yes, we had a lot of external analog outboard gear. But if you are now doing a digital console and you want to go in and out of certain things for your drums, let's say, I want to run kick and snare through these Neves or this and that. Well, there's always a little bit of latency from going D to A into that analog gear, then back in A to D. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to have it ever so slight little time smear. Now I could start to figure out how many samples and delay things, but the onboard compressors, limiters, EQ on the Lavo console that we now use now for about 9-10 years really sound fantastic, and we've finally gotten a hold of the Waves sound grid where we have the whole Waves plugin set.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you have to sort of find a fine line, especially in what we're doing, between expediency and practicality of being live on the air and wanting to be complete tweakhead audiophile.
What do you naturally? What do you tend to be in terms of that? Are you the kind of guy who likes to be like an audiophile who will make sure every frequency is in place? Or are you just kind of like get it done, get it sounding good, and send it out?
I'm somewhere in between. I'll give you this quick little story of doing a project for Concord Records out in Berkeley at Fantasy Studios with this magnificent singer Nina Freelon, and I'd set up a mic and a preamp for her, and then my assistant engineer said, well, why don't you try this mic? So I went with that mic, and different preamps sounded glorious, wonderful, fine. Then a couple days later, the producer says, oh, we have a cello player coming in. I'm like, okay. Do we still have that U67 and that GML preamp set up? Are we doing? Let's try that on the cello. And so I go out there and listen to the sound of the instrument, and then, let's put this here and so forth. We open up the fader. Everyone's like, that sounds great. Fine, let's go with it. Now, I could have said, okay, now move the mic 2 inches. No, now go the other way, but switch this up. And I could have tweaked for 45 minutes. But I also know that when the record is released, it's not called Josiah Gluck Engineers Nina Freelon. And as a result, all I would do, apart from just, jerking off in front of a whole bunch of people, is I'm getting people bored, pissed off, wasting time. And as a colleague of mine, Ryan Hewitt, has said when we talked about these things, if it sounds good, it is good.
Mm-hmm.
And how many different ways can you listen to something flat? You can drive yourself nuts, but it's not about me. It's about keeping musicians happy, about keeping the session moving. It's about keeping the vibe, keeping the flow. And I know this sounds like a bunch of platitudes, but it's absolutely true. And those are the sessions and those are the people that invite you back.
Yeah, because you get their work done, it sounds good, and you're not a pain in the ass.
Yes. So also, the other thing is, if I'm doing a little jazz ensemble, or even doing this stuff at SNL, it comes together really quickly. First of all, because it has to come together quickly, and we've gotten very good at putting it together quickly. But the other thing is, it's not that hard to get a really good drum sound if you have really well-tuned drums that sound good, and by someone who knows how to play the kit. Not hit the drums, play them.
Mm-hmm.
And too many times I've heard projects where it's like, you know what? People just did not get out of their own way. And it's so easy to overdo something. And I've heard things where someone will play me something that they did, and it's like, that sounds good. And I'll think, that snare drum sounds like a soggy hat box. How did you miss that? Were you so focused on the Ocarina of the Moose Call that you forgot about the snare? And you have to find a nice way to go like, well, maybe that could be a little brighter. I don't know, man. What do you think? But, so yeah, I definitely fall somewhere in between. We need to get this done, but there's no reason it has to sound bad. I mean, I think the best way to describe it is working at SNL and other things. There was a point when I'd sit there and be like, man, this does not sound good. And I'm just stymied as to what to do. I'm not happy with this. Rarely is that the time. Now it feels like, there's a problem here, but I know exactly what it is and I know exactly how to fix it. And
when did that start? How long ago did that start where you really were feeling confident that you knew exactly what you needed to fix when something was wrong?
Oh, I don't know. In this audience, I can say, well, what time is it? No. I know it's, maybe 20 years ago or so, but I'll tell you something. It's a constant learning curve. It's a constant process. if I'm assisting Jay for the week because he's there and he's setting up some toms or EQing whatever he's EQing, I'll be sitting there watching some dials. Maybe he'll nod at me to take care of something or work on other things. But you know what I'm also doing? It may be, I don't know, the 1,000th or 25,000th tom hit I've heard him EQ. I'm watching, I'm listening, I'm learning. There's absolutely no reason to think that, oh, well, I got this now. I don't need to do this.
When you're back home, like say in a production week, but you have some time at home, are you the kind of guy who's always like trying to stay up and stay up to date on what the newest technology is, or say like, oh, maybe I should try this when I go in?
Yes, here and there. I mean, the thing that I've been fortunate about is whether or not it's the latest version of Pro Tools or these mics or when we, this fiber MADI interconnect and stuff with the Lavo console. I've kind of been, I know this sounds really speaking of douchey and I'm not this, I've been paid to learn this stuff.
That's not douchey. That's totally, I think it's a fair statement.
It's a total blessing to have been able to do this. And so I do stay on top of things. I mean, and I'll go to the Audio Engineering Society conventions and I get a bunch of periodicals. Tape Op just came in. So, is that backwards to you? Anyway.
No, I can see it.
Okay.
I don't know the logic of with the cameras. I can never tell when it's going to be reversed or when it's going to be normal. I still don't know the algorithm or the logic behind that.
Well, Michael Jackson is spelled correctly back there, so that's good.
My favorite album. I have to have a picture. So I couldn't hear you for a second. What'd you say?
No, it's just that I feel that I try to keep up on as much as I can, and I haven't gone for a few years, but I would go out to the NAB convention out in Las Vegas, which is just insane on so many levels. And it's like 120,000 people go to that convention. But I'll just walk miles and miles of looking at video and lighting stuff just to get a sense of what's happening, what's new going on in the video end of things. And yes, all of those little miniature helicopters that will hold a 4K or 8K camera, ARRI or the ARRI 65 or something, so you can shoot those amazing sequences in James Bond. I mean, I'm not going to necessarily have need for that anytime in the next couple of millennia, but nonetheless, it's just fun to see. That's just a way to keep up and see what's going on.
I get it. I love audio and I love video. Audio is more my thing. But I always try to keep up just relatively, just to make sure I'm not falling off, because there's that point where I get too sucked into something and then it becomes almost like nauseating because you're learning all of this detail, and it starts to drag me away from what the actual use of the product is, which is to make something, and instead I end up just analyzing like all the tech specs about it. So I kind of have to tell myself to not do that.
Yeah,
but
I will go down to the Peabody Conservatory at Music down in Baltimore. It's part of Johns Hopkins. And the only real tutelage I ever had in this field for a couple of semesters my sophomore year they had a small recording setup for recording these artists. And it was all classical music down in Peabody. And they were our connection because they got so much tape in bulk, Ampex 456, and we would just get these pancakes at quarter-inch. The radio station would pay them for it. And one of the things I've talked about is we use all of this gear that you can look at, put up on a bench, put up on a scope, and see how precisely it does what it's supposed to do. Whether or not it's flat all the way from, DC to light, and it has this type of distortion, and it's just all perfect. We can demonstrate how precisely and accurately it works. And yet we use it to take an art form, if you will, which is, to my mind, the most personal and the most subjective of all of them. You and I can all agree, looking at a painting, that there's two eyes here and that there's, or what the color of something is and whatnot, but music affects all of us in a very unique way. It's purely descriptive. You can't really say it's definitely this or that. I think you say for the average person. So we take this highly precise gear and then capture and reconvey this experience back out to the world. And sometimes it's a very heightened reality, listening to drums like on Thriller or on a Steely Dan record or anything else. They don't necessarily sound like that in real life. Your head isn't just inside the drum kit, where your head is not just inside the piano, or the guitar is right here or right here. And you create this kind of heightened reality in this aural landscape. But it's just a unique melding of all of that. And at some point, you have to be able to say, okay, I'm taking a step back from all the technology and just let the music speak for itself. I still find that the benchmark for that is a lot of the Beatles recordings, where if you're an audio person, that stuff was futzed with and potchkeyed with different speeds and everything. And yet somehow that just all recedes into the background and it's just the song.
Yeah.
Now, is that a testament to the taste of that? Is it a testament to just how brilliant and magnificent the songs are? Spoiler alert, yes, all of the above. But that to me is just endlessly fascinating. The same way when I'm mixing something and ooh, let me pan this here, do that, doing stuff in surround, because it's just fun. It's a lot of fun.
So does it ever get taxing to you going through and, nitpicking, or not nitpicking, but like that aspect? Because there are things that I like that definitely, interest me, but at a certain point, especially when it comes to audio, starts to get taxing on the brain because you're thinking about that stuff. Can you do it basically endlessly and you're always excited about it?
The funny thing is, mixing is the kind of thing where you're really in it and you're focused. And that, you have to watch your monitor levels. And after about 8 hours in the studio, you start to, start seeing, furry wombats crawl across the console or something like that. If I'm on a tracking date and it's the band, once you get everything sort of set up and you're babysitting levels and making sure everything's recording properly, that I can hang in for a real long time. We're doing overdubs and so forth. But mixing is really something you have to concentrate on. And one thing that I started doing many years ago is I would take my shoes off and just work in my stocking feet. Say it's like being on a long plane ride, you just want to be comfortable. And I remember one time my aunt coming to the studio because she had a friend in from out of town who wanted to say hi. I said, well, the best you can do is come by Sound on Sound, where I'm working on these little jazz projects for this label called Steeplechase. And they weren't like ooh and ah about the gear or how it sounded or anything. These two women were just like, you actually have a job where you can take your shoes off? They were just like,
that was the thing.
That was their thing. They couldn't believe that I was working with my shoes off. And I always like it when I'm working and I get to a point of like, yes, now I can take my shoes off.
That's how you know you're in the right place.
I'm in the zone when I feel like, okay, I can take my shoes off. I'll have to walk out to the studio on occasion and do something, but when I'm just kind of like that. And it's, a room full of musicians, so you gotta put your shoes on when you go to the bathroom. So, but other than that.
Hey, well, Josiah, before I let you go, I have a question in the comments from Ian Miller. If you don't mind, let me read this to you. So let me grab my phone so I can see it. Jeez, I'm blind. Do the musicians on SNL tell you what they want, or are you in complete control of how they sound?
Oh no, it's definitely a two-way street. They sometimes come in with sometimes they want gear that they bring in that they must have. They must have this reverb, they must have this. A lot of times we have things available. A lot of times people will bring in their own microphones, which we will let them do, unless we are having issues with it. Because remember, we have to play nice with monitors and PA. If it's a really loud band and they want wedges and they don't have in-ears, then that mic has to be really good to work with that. And if it's not, we have a problem. I did, when I worked with Prince, he and I sat shoulder to shoulder for about half an hour working on the mix. That was a very, I wouldn't say taxing, but it was a very difficult thing to do because of how he wanted to be able to hear things on stage. He wanted my mix, to go to the audience, to broadcast, and to the stage for them to hear. So I had to think of a way to create my mix, but also be able to send a mix to them. And the fact that I'm mixing in surround, so I had to create a crash down stereo mix for there. And he wanted certain effects when he came in to listen, and I said, I think we're going too much in the other direction. Can we work with that? The thing is, he was an unbelievable gentleman and professional, firm handshake, and possibly my greatest achievement is I got him to crack up. I got him to laugh.
What did you say?
He wanted to get some guitars really crunchy, and I knew what he was going for with this sort of overdriving preamps. Think of, Beatles Revolution kind of thing, with DIs. And I said, it's a digital console. I don't have that immediately available, and it's just going to crap out. And I said, but you know what, man, I think we're going to singe all living matter within a quarter-mile radius of this place tonight. I think we're going to be fine. And he laughed, and he said, yeah, I like that. We're going to do that. That's good. And a lot of his crew and some of the SNL talent department are all, in the room, and everyone's sort of standing there like, it's Prince, and we're doing this. And I just wanted to turn to them and say, can any of you do that? Who can do that? All right? I did that. That was an amazing evening. And I'd say the SNL 40th anniversary show, where it actually
you ended up winning an Emmy for that, right?
Yes. That was pretty amazing. And when I think about the career arc from fooling around with little tape recorders and working with the SNL band in 1981, and then working on the show and sitting there with Bob and I doing the show, I never would have thought that that's where this all would have led. Well, there you go.
Do you have any what a great arc. I mean, starting out just tinkering around with things, and now it's your full-time career. I don't think there's really, that's like almost like a rom-com type ending to the story, or it's that's where most people want to be. So you've lived it out, Josiah. You've really done it.
Yeah, I mean, a rom-com with gear, I suppose, which is
a nerdy rom-com.
Nerdy rom-com.
Hey, well, before I let you go, anything else you'd like to say to the people?
Nothing other than just thanks for tuning in. This has been really nice, and this is it hasn't been nerdy at all, which is nice. You just talk more about vibe and history, but yeah, this was a very nice way to spend the morning.
Thank you. I appreciate you joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And to everyone listening, thank you so much. We'll be live in February. We got a couple days off, but we're back with Adam Holtzman and Steve Gadd next month, y'all.
All right.
I'll see you guys soon.